Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're gathered today on the 16th of the 11th month on our Creator's calendar as we comprehend it according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, or what they call the Zadok calendar. And that is lining up with the 25th of January 2025 on the Gregorian calendar. And we are continuing with our study of Yobelim. We just segued from reading the book of Shemot or Exodus after we got to the children surrounding Mount Sinai, where they had received the eternal covenant from the mouth of Yahuah himself on Mount Sinai. And then it wasn't just the 10 Commandments as we read, but it was the ordinances and the right rulings that were attached to them, all given as a covenant, spoken before the people, affirmed 3 times, ratified with blood. And then he called Moshe up to the mountain with him, where he spends the next 40 days and 40 nights, if you remember what was going on. But during that time is when this book was being given to him, if you will, or the events here are transpiring, as we already read. Last week we covered the introduction there and when it was given, and also the creation account, like the first part of Bereshit or Genesis. But that creation account is a little more detailed, where it goes over the 22 works specifically on each day. And then we showed how that lines up with the 22 letters of the alphabet and the 22 patriarchs from Adam to Jacob, and how all of that works together for righteousness and set apartness, being a parable of his works throughout history. And ob willing, we are able to show you that a little bit, not as detailed as it certainly could be. But getting back on track here, we're going to continue with the book of Yobelim. And as I was mentioning before we started recording, I would like everyone to keep in mind the covenant, what we called the common law, that we just covered, because it was a literal answer to all the errors that were brought in from the beginning until this time. From the garden until the covenant was given, all the sins that the adversary had helped manifest in this world through his different devices were being corrected through this covenant given to his children, who were meant to be trained by it themselves and then a light to the nations. Excuse me. So please keep in mind what we read as you go through here, and Father willing, you might be able to see how it's a correction for all the things that were brought in. The Yobelim chapter 3, Adam names all that was on the earth and the first Yobel, or Jubilee. And on the 6 days of the second week, we brought, according to the word of Yahuah, unto Adam all the beasts. And if you remember, Adam both means I will bleed, and I am, Dama is the likeness, not the image, but the likeness. So all of that plays in the word of what those letters mean in Hebrew, and all of it is true in what he is. That kind of phenomenon is literally how the Hebrew language functions. He is the word through which all things came to be. It's what makes reality what it is. So the more you comprehend that, the easier it is to perceive how things are today. But he brought unto Adam all the beasts, and all the cattle, and all the birds, and everything that moves on the earth, and everything that moves in the water, according to their kinds, and according to their types. The beasts on the first day. If you keep in mind, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to always cut in while we're reading, but as the things pop in mind, I like to share, because this isn't just a reading through. You can listen to lots of people just read scriptures, read every book that we're covering. I'm trying to help make it easier to comprehend different things that you might not have considered, or how everything ties together in a way that you might not be aware of. But if you keep in mind that everything that the Father says, Yahushua likewise says, and everything that he sees, he likewise does. He copies, and it's an echo, like a hand in the glove type of thing. And you see that over and over in everything that is done. You can even see it in the creation week, how Adam was made at the end of the sixth day, and then, like the second Adam, who was first, created all things and made Adam at the end. He uses the second Adam, who's the first Adam. I know that seems bad. The first Adam, who's really the second, right? That contrariness there. But the Adam that he created, he uses to name all the beasts, giving him dominion, just like he was given dominion, a copy of the true. And that's what you can see all the way through this week. The what he names in what order, all of it is parables, all of it's significant to the events that were going to happen in regard to men during the same period. But it takes more than just a talking of it. I'm pointing it out so that someone else can say, oh man, that's amazing, and really dig in and look. It's not just to acknowledge it and let it fade away from your memories, though. But like I said, the manifold Chokmah, or wisdom of Elohim, cannot, we can't get to the depths of it as a man. There's too much in even one verse that can occupy your time if you allow it to. And we can't do that all the time. But I do want to point these things out for everyone to take, to consider, to look into, and perhaps to do a study on yourself, if you please. But please keep in mind, this is also a parable of these relations. And the first thing that he's given is the beasts on the first day, the cattle on the second day, the birds on the third day, and all that which moves on the earth on the fourth day, and that which moves in the water on the fifth day. And Adam named them all by their respective names, and as he called them, so was their name. And on these days, and on these 5 days, Adam saw all these, male and female, according to every kind that was on the earth. But he was alone and found no helpmate for him. That word for alone is bad, where it says it was not tov for Adam to be bad. It means alone or to be exiled or separated, like a branch that's cut off and removed or exiled. That same word is the root word for the Buddha that we talked about before, to the exiles of the people that became known as Buddhists, or the Buddhist religion. I mention that because it's mentioned in Amos and other places, just like the Lollards and the different words are used literally in history. That was one of them. Another phenomenon with that, however, was the Buddha, the head man that was the Buddha, who in his life was not worshipped or deified, but was so after his death by his son, who brought the people into idolatry through it. He was originally known as Yahuah Dhamma, just like Adam is I am like, or I am the likeness. Yahuah Dhamma means Yahuah like. So that's for a different time. We'll cover that more in depth as we get to it in history, Father willing. But I was reminded of it by the use of the word here. So we'll go ahead and continue. And if you remember, this is like what our Mashiach is doing, where he's going through and naming all the different things and looking for a helpmate for him, but finding none, right? In this day, it's of his own self that he's brought forth, of his own flesh and his own blood. And this is what Shaul was talking about. This secret is great, but I'm speaking of Mashiach and the assembly, or his quote unquote, his body, the collective that is of him. Says, and Yahuwah said to us, it is not tov that the man should be alone. Let us help or make a helpmate for him. And Yahuwah our Elohim caused a deep sleep to fall upon him, and he slept. And he took for a woman one rib, and that word for woman is ashat, or asha, right? That ashat is a woman or help, wife, just like It's synonymous with the two. But it says and he took for the woman one rib from amongst his ribs, and this rib was the origin of the woman from amongst his ribs. And he built up the flesh in its stead, and built the woman. And he awaked Adam out of his sleep, and on awaking he rose on the sixth day, and he brought her to him. And he knew her, and said to her, This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called wife, all right, because she was taken from her husband. Therefore shall a man and wife be one, and therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And this is the premise of the foundation of how things are and were ever meant to be, where the two are made one, and this is what our Mashiach came to reestablish in his renewed covenant. Not something that was with the covenant that had been broken because of the hardness of their hearts. He gave them the divorce, and it was a condition of the reality they were living through, which is the whole point of why it was permissible at that time, because it's what he himself had done for them with the purpose of his death and reconciliation to bring them back. And now that he is able to bring them back, the conditions have changed, where it is no longer permissible to divorce, period. But if a husband or a wife is committing adultery or idolatry, which is spiritual adultery, you're to put them away until reconciliation is to be made. That's what he's trying to restore, because that's what he's literally done himself. And he, just like I told you before with the rich man, where he never does anything that he himself has not showed us the way. And he told that rich man that kept all the commandments that he loved, he says, There's one thing that you lack. Go sell all your possessions, give to the poor, and come follow me, and your treasures will be great in the Shamayim. Because that's like himself, the very thing he had done. He gave up all his possessions. He humbled himself to the utmost for his father, willingly obedient even unto death, and given the greatest, given the name above every name, given the position at the right hand of the power on high, right? At the right hand of El Shaddai. So the point is we get to follow in his footsteps, or we get to follow in the other. But we want to pay attention to what he's done, and do likewise. When he says don't do a thing, there's good reason for it. He's made reconciliation for us, and we ought to be grateful. But right here, you're going to see over and over again that uh, the foundations for all the things that he does are usually right here in the beginning, and it's commemorated memorially forever. Every law that he gives. That's one of the premises about the book of Yobelim. It really shows, in particular, the feast days and the things in relation to cleanliness for begetting children, having a proper um, cultivation of the field, as Clement puts it. In the recognitions of Clement, he mentions that if men take such care in the cultivation of seed when preparing the field and removing all the weeds and doing everything they do to make it fit for their benefit and growth, how much more would you not cultivate the seed in the field of your own heart and get that proper before producing your own seed? Now, this goes into detail for how, and if you think about it, why. So with that, we'll go ahead and continue. It says, in the first week, was Adam created, and the rib, his wife, in the second week, he showed her unto him. And for this reason, the commandment was given to keep in their defilement, the male or a male 7 days, and for a female twice 7 days. All right, and then we can go over this sometime if you need to, but this is the foundations for the cleanliness laws in the Torah that we actually did not cover. It did not show it anywhere in the original covenant ordinance writings that we had read that's called the common law. It is in the additional, in the Levitical or Deuteronomy, if you will. It is part of what we would consider Torah, and it is most certainly what we should consider the common law as bound or binding and applicable for our lives, for our benefit. But in the course of time, this part was not acknowledged always as the common law, was not always kept, and the consequences of it, while it may not have been directly considered a sin because it may have been nescience and not ignorance, we can't know the hearts of every man, but he does. So we ought not judge anyone without knowing what they say first, right? The point is that we can see the consequences of not having obedience to these, even if it was not judged as wickedness to them intentionally. Because purity laws and not having sanitation has caused massive amounts of problems through history. It's just a fact. It was adhering to the sanitary or sanitation laws of Scripture that the likes of Florence Nightingale and others were able to cause benefit to the people and restore health and well-being. But we'll go ahead and continue right here. It says, and after Adam had completed 40 days in the land where he had been created, we brought him into the Garden of Eden to till and keep it. That's the word shamar. It's the root for where we get the word samurai, but to guard, keep, and watch, right? And to till the ground. And this is what he was taught to do as a farmer by our Creator, or the voice of Yahuah in the garden. And if you look at the calendar, when he was created was on the 6th day of the first week. After 40 days would have been the 14th of the second month, or that second Passover, which is when he would have been brought into the garden. A significant appointed time that would be echoed in different ways, right? It says, but his wife they brought in on the 80th day, and after this she entered into the Garden of Eden. And for this reason, the commandment is written on the Shamayim tablets in regard to her that gives birth. If she bears a male, she shall remain in her uncleanness 7 days according to the first week of days, and 3 days shall she remain in the blood of her purifying. And she shall not touch any set apart thing, nor enter into the sanctuary or set apart place, until she accomplishes these days, which in the case or are enjoined in the case of a male child. But in the case, of a female child, she shall remain in her uncleanness 2 weeks of days, according to the first 2 weeks, and 66 days in the blood of her purification, and they will be in all 80 days. And when she had completed these 80 days, we brought her into the Garden of Eden. For it is most set apart than all the earth besides, and every tree that is planted in it is set apart. Therefore, there was ordained regarding her who bears a male or a female child, the statute of those days that she should touch no set apart thing, nor enter into the set apart place, until these days for the male or female child are accomplished. And remember, there's parables in everything. You can take the time to think about what all this would represent, just like we mentioned how Adam naming everything was an echo of the creation, just like our Mashiach had just done. Everything here is a parable foretelling future events in a certain way as well, because there's nothing that will happen that hasn't already. It's an established way of how reality works. It is what the truth reveals himself as, right? All right, excuse me. It says, therefore, there was ordained regarding her who bears a male or a female child the statute of those days that she should touch no set apart thing, nor enter into the set apart place, until these days for the male or female child are accomplished. This is the Torah and testimony which was written down for Yisrael, in order that they should observe it all the days. And in the first week of the first Yobel, 1 through 7, Anamundi, which is the first 7 years, the first week, right? Adam and his wife were in the Garden of Eden for 7 years, tilling and keeping it. And we gave him work and we instructed him to do everything that is suitable for tillage. And that is the Aleph, if you recall from last week. I will teach and learn with my mouth, to goad and pull, right? To make familiar, to become acquaintances, to yoke together, trained and educated, to domesticate, to bring forth thousands that way. That was the whole purpose, right? And this is where he says that we gave him work and we instructed him to do everything that is suitable for tillage. And he tilled the garden and was naked and knew it not, and was not ashamed. And he protected the garden from the birds. This is the first reference of having to protect anything from birds in an adversarial manner that is echoed by the righteous through history in both literal and non-literal senses. You can see it with uh, not Noah is commanding the birds, so it's opposite there. But Abram has to fight them off a few times in his life, and there's a few others that do so as well. You also think of the parable of the birds by the wayside. But it says, and he protected the garden from the birds and beasts and cattle, and gathered its fruit and ate, and put aside the residue for himself and for his wife, and put aside that which was being kept. And after the completion of 7 years, which he had completed there, 7 years exactly, 8 Anamundi, right, or 8 years from creation, and in the second month, on the 17th day, remember I mentioned that before, and you'll see this again as a significant day. The serpent came and approached the woman, and the serpent said to the woman, has Yahuah commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And she said to it rather, of all the fruit of the trees of the garden Yahuah has said to us, eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, Yahuah has said to us, you shall not eat thereof, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And if you pay attention, that last part is nowhere written as a commandment given to Adam. It might have been enjoined by him to her, superadded to it, or she might have done that herself, but it is an instance of adding to and taking from. This is the adding to, and then when she looks at it and sees what's right in her own eyes instead of what he had said, that's the taking from, because she's now taken his authority and placed her own opinion above it to her own destruction. But we'll go ahead and continue. And if you remember, this is some of the beginnings of the error that would come with the mystery religions later, where the woman Tarte, right? It's also the woman who is called Rhea or the gazer because she saw the tree, that it was agreeable and pleasant. So we won't get into that too far, but these are all how these things begun. That woman was tied to Semiramis or Nimrod's wife because she came after the flood and she was put up as a figure to venerate in place of the antediluvians, but they always mixed in the history of what had gone before to give themselves legitimacy, whether it was done by them personally or later on by the priesthoods that came about to keep people in ignorance and mystery, relying on them instead of looking for what's true. It was intentional. And remember, all of it was at the instigations of the adversary, where it very plainly says that all sin, error, and things of like nature are from him. He is the source of it, and his purposes are to lead the sons of light astray, or the children of light astray during this time. But to continue here, it says, she said that you should neither touch it, lest you die, and that was added. And the serpent said to the woman, you shall not surely die, for Yahuah does know that on the day you shall eat thereof, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as mighty ones, and you will know good and evil. So, and you will know da'ah, right? Between good and between evil. I believe that is the wording there in the Hebrew. But to know, to have knowledge, in particular of the good and evil, and that's in a practical sense by being defiled by it. So you know from experience what these things are. It's not necessarily a good thing or what we'd call beneficial. But to claim to be like mighty ones or to claim that man can be deified, right, through disobedience. These are the things that Satan promises, and they haven't changed if you look at all the stuff that's going on. You put a different veneer on, it's like different types of makeup on a pig, but it's still the same thing underneath. And that's what you can see if you start reading this stuff and taking it seriously. The scriptures have the answer for how all of this stuff in reality works. It doesn't matter what you watch on television. It's deceptive, but truth is in Yahushua, right? And it says, and the woman saw the tree, that it was agreeable and pleasant to the eye, and that its fruit was good for food. And she took thereof and ate. And when she had first covered her shame with fig leaves, if you look, they say, and I have to double check because I don't remember off the top of my head if I confirm this or not. I used to be gullible, and eventually our father opened my eyes to start actually proving things instead of just sharing blindly. And I was surprised to find out that a lot of things that people share don't have any validity in reality, sadly. One of the first things was in relation to scripture, where they say in the first 5 books of Torah, you've got in the first two spelling one direction, Torah, if you count every certain amount of letters. And then in the last two going the other way, it's the same way. And in that middle book of Leviticus, every 7 letters, you can find Yod He Wah He, Yod He Wah He, Yod He Wah He, spelling his name. And I was like, oh man, that's amazing. I thought it was great. Shared that meme, probably shared it a couple times with my memories. And then one time I decided, you know what? Because I was learning the Hebrew, I was excited about that. And I said, I want to see that for myself. And I went and looked, and I was extremely disappointed. I think I even cried a little because not a bit of it was true. And I got very sobered at that point, and I decided I'm never going to get suckered like that again. And I check everything. And boy, oh boy, I was in for an awakening. Because I tell you what, you'll find if you actually do that, that most everything they use as a fear tactic in men's lives today, whether it's atomic bombs or radioactive materials and anything like that, it's a lie. It's based on deception because he can kill, steal, and destroy, and he's a father of lies, but there's no truth in him. And you can easily disprove things that are not true with reason and facts. But not having us do those things is what keeps us confused and controlled. So I was very thankful in the long run for that sadness that it brought me, but it was a shocker and it was very sobering. I encourage everyone to do that for themselves, and that's why I'm not going to plainly say fig leaves means excuses. But I do recall that being the case. Whether or not it's something I looked at myself or it was just a thing I had heard that is not substantiated, I cannot at this point confirm, which is why I'm mentioning that to you. But I'd encourage everyone to check that out. I believe you can look in the book of Bereshit as well and find that section in an interlinear, and then check out that word by clicking either way with the Strong's numbers to get the different definitions of the same spelling. If you do find that out before me, share it in the comments and I'd appreciate it. Thank you for your time. But we'll go ahead and continue. It says, "And when she had first covered her shame with fig leaves, she gave thereof to Adam, and he ate, and his eyes were opened, and he saw that he was naked." I do want to point out, while it doesn't explicitly say here, it does explicitly say elsewhere, she was deceived, or what they call beguiled. That same word is used by Moshe, bewitched or beguiled, in Deuteronomy. It says, don't be beguiled by these things because it won't save you. And it didn't save her. But she was rightly beguiled or deceived, tricked, hoodwinked, whatever you want to call that, into a thing and reasoning it out because she wasn't given the commandment directly. Adam was, and he ate, and he knew, he openly, knowingly did the thing that was wrong. And that's why man cannot redeem himself. No one born of him can redeem himself because of the willing evil, just like when Cain killed Abel. That's a thing that we have to acknowledge as a fact. That's why Yahushua had to come through the seed of a woman. But this is why there's lines that get cut off. The Canaanites, for example, when Canaan broke the vow, he did to another the same thing like Cain killing his brother. His seed was cursed. Every one of them was under condemnation. Unless they left that land, it was never going to be reconciled. All right. The same thing with Cain's children. There was no reconciliation for what he had done. It was reciprocated to him, and every one of them died in the flood. So these are things that we have to keep in mind, but it's the truth being played out. And this is why these things are established the way they are. It's why he came the way he did. It's what is reality. Now, hopefully, this will help us to start being more fearful about the things that we say, think, and do. Because if he can so innocently do something willingly and cause death, we ought to be more circumspect about what we knowingly or willingly do that he said was wrong. I'm very eternally grateful that our Creator chalks it up to ignorance to everyone who sins. It is ignorance, because if you truly knew, you would never do it. But that's all tying into the future judgment again. If you don't really believe, you're not going to really fear. Our Mashiach, however, said, fear that intentionally, so that we would believe and then cut off even the thing that would bring us to the temptation of sin, if you take his parables, right, for what they meant. It says, and he took fig leaves and sewed them together and made an apron for himself and covered his shame. And Yahuah cursed the serpent and was wroth with it forever. And he was wroth with the woman because she listened to the voice of the serpent and did eat. And he said to her, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your pains. In sorrow you shall bring forth children, and your return shall be unto your husband, and he will rule over you. Meaning she's going to look to her husband, and he's going to have dominion. The purpose, it was relinquishing her equal. I mean, there was equality, and then now there is not because of what happened. Some people might take that and scoff or be disagreeable, but this is the established way the Torah functions. A man has property rights over his children, son and daughter. When daughters come of age, they have to be married, and a man does his duty and is honorable if he does it right. And then a man's husband, or then the husband is head of the wife, just like scripture clearly says. This was ordained because of right here. And the intention was that what Adam failed to do this first time, he's now required to do on pain of death. Now, he's going to learn to be the one who's like our Mashiach, who's willingly going to die for his wife. Right? That was the whole point, to train. But in the way, it's to protect her. This is why when he hears a vow, he can break it or he can confirm it. But when a widow does, it's permanent because she has no head like that. We'll get into more of that stuff later. I'm sure this can be very touchy subjects for a lot of people, and I'm not trying to be offensive to anyone. My whole intention is to share what is true and how we ought to be and why. If you see that this is an error somewhere, please share. But otherwise, please consider that this is actually how it's supposed to be, because that's how it's established. It says, and to Adam also he said, because you have listened unto the voice of your wife, instead of unto the voice of Yahuah, right? And have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat thereof. Cursed be the ground for your sake. The ground is cursed because Adam couldn't be. You cannot curse what is Baruch. And this is a pattern that you also see in Noach's children and later on as well. Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to you, and you shall eat your bread in the sweat of your face, till you return to the earth from whence you were taken. For earth you are, and unto earth shall you return. And he made for them coats of skin, and clothed them, and sent them forth from the Garden of Eden. Now, we're going to look at the dates here in particular, but the time they left, remember, they sinned on the 17th day of the second month, the same time the flood started, the rains of the flood started that very day, and that very day was when the manna began to rain down for the children in the wilderness. So what was a cause of destruction for the one was a barakah for them. But when these skins of coat, when these coat, sorry, when he made the coats of skin is not specifically mentioned, but when they were kicked out of the garden is on the first day of the fourth month, meaning they had from the second, third, and fourth month for these things to take place. And I believe the exact time that this happened would have been the 15th of the third month, the same time that he ratified and made every covenant. Can't prove it with what we have, but it's the pattern that fits everything. So that's not something that you have to believe dogmatically, but it is within that period from the second month, from the 17th day of the second month until the first day of the fourth month. From that to the other, some time in that period is when he did this. Says, and on that day on which Adam went forth from the garden, he offered as a sweet savor and offering frankincense, galbanum, and stactite, and spices in the morning, with the rising of the sun from the day when he covered his shame. And on that day was closed the mouth of all beasts, and of cattle, and of birds, and of whatever walks, and of whatever moves, so that they could no longer speak. For they had all spoken with one another with one lip, and with one tongue. They all spoke what we call the Hebrew language, or the language of creation. What we call the Bible does not call it Hebrew. It calls it, in the English translations, it says the language of the Jews in two places. But if you look up what it says in the Hebrew there, it is Yahudith, just like the name we have for one of the apocryphal books is called Judith. It's the exact same word, but we don't remove Yahu and add a J. It's Yahudith or Yahudith, and that is the language of those who confess, acknowledge, and praise Yahuah. So that is the language of creation that came from the bosom of the Father, through which all things were created. But everything spoke from that tongue, and then it was removed on that day. It says, and he sent out of the Garden of Eden all flesh that was in the Garden of Eden, and all flesh was scattered according to its kinds and according to its types unto the places which had been created for them. And to Adam alone did he give to cover his shame of all the beasts and cattle. On this account it is prescribed on the Shamayim tablets as touching all those who know the judgment of the Torah, as touching all those who know the judgment or the right ruling of the Torah. That's why the book of Jacob says, to him who knows to do good and does it not, to him it is sin. So, and this is why it's important, especially for professed believers, Christian, or whatever you call it. If you've read the Bible or you've read the Apocrypha, or if you read any of these writings and it plainly tells you don't do a thing or you ought to do a thing, like don't round the corners of your beard, you don't mar the edges of your hair, you don't put etchings in your skin. If you do these contrary to the thing that he said not to do, even though he told you not to do it, you're now just like Adam, an active rebellious rebel, cut off, right? And that's the reason why he had to die. Every time we do that, but it's only if we know when it's accounted against you. That's the point. And that's why Shaul or Paul explains that the Torah is not laid down for the righteous, but for the wicked and sinner, because we've all fallen short. And when you learn about what it is you've done, then it revives it, and then you find that you've become guilty. This very phenomenon is exactly what is laid down in the original covenant writings that we will see as soon as we're done with the book of Yobelim and we hop back to them. Because in the practical application of the ordinances that we have in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, you get the example of this very thing. So we'll cover it when we get to them, and you'll see that in a few ways. And that's part of what the equity or the right ruling, the equality of the law that we have to, you know, make applicable in our lives when it's not just the letter that's going to cover it. In the same way that you would deal with the equity of how a thief should repay debts depending on what was stolen. Not everything is sheep and cows anymore, or bulls. But it says, as touching all those knowing the judgment of the Torah, that they should cover their shame and should not uncover themselves as the nations uncover themselves. And on the new month, or Chodesh, of the 4th month, Adam and his wife went forth from the Garden of Eden, and they dwelt in the land of Eldah, in the land of their creation. And Adam called the name of his wife Hua, and that means he titled that as the mother of all living. And Hua is like Chait, the living creatures. It's a related word there with the Chait as the beginning of it. It says, and they had no son till the first Yobel, and after this he knew her. Now this says after the first Yobel, and it put 8 a.m., but that's not That's not possible to be accurate. If it meant the first week, that would be after the first week. But the Yobel is 50 years, as we'll get to in the course of this, you'll see over and over again. It says, now he tilled the land as he had been instructed in the Garden of Eden. And in the third week, in the second Yobel, she gave birth to Cain. So the third week in the second Yobel would be from the years 21 through 28. Right? It doesn't give you an exact one, but I'm trying to help you picture that. It would be the years 21 through 28 of that second set of 50. But it says, in the third week, in the second Yobel, she gave birth to Cain, and in the fourth, she gave birth to Abel, or Havel. And in the fifth, she gave birth to a daughter, Awen. And this is the first use of that word, a rather amazing word, which is like the fountain or spring. It also is the Celtic or Gaelic word for inspiration. It's the name, uh, it's one of the names for the creator, but now they have a different connotation for it. Either way, it's related to that word we were talking about before we started recording, mayon as well, or a habitation and dwelling. I believe one of the common things in the Gaelic is that the first letter will be dropped. And if you look at the books that we've shared, there's quite a few on the affinity of the Hebrew and Gaelic, and then how that Chaldean Gaelic, which was originally the Hebrew, was the foundation of ancient Greek and ancient Latin that goes along with the histories of the Hebrews founding Troy and then going to Italy and then going to Britain, exactly following the flow of that. Um, if you look at the common phenomenon for dropping the first letters, not only in the Celtic, but also in the Greek, where you have like Iberia with the Hebrew, the H becomes silent or whatever, or they actually add the H for that. So that's not a good example. I'm sorry. But Lazarus coming from Eleazar is one example where the aleph is dropped from the beginning and they add a Greek suffix. They have quite a few where the first letter drops, and it's a regular phenomenon in the Gaelic languages as the Hebrew is shifting. But we'll continue. It says, and in the first year of the third Yobel, Cain slew Havel or Abel because Yahuah accepted the sacrifice of Abel or Havel and did not accept the offering of Cain. And he slew him in the field, and his blood cried from the ground to Shamayim, complaining because he had slain him. If you recall what is all throughout Scripture, his blood crying out, and our Mashiach's blood speaking better things than the blood of Abel, because he's not crying for vengeance, but reconciliation. That's the amazing gift that we have. But the proof that the blood cries is right here. And how that is possible is because the soul, the nefesh, it's translated as life in different places where it says the life is in the blood. That word is the nefesh. It is the nefesh, which is your soul, separate from the ruach, which will exist after the body dies. Here's proof of that right here in Yobelim, and you also have it in Bereshit, where after the death of Havel, his blood, where his soul is, cries out from the ground because the soul is in the blood. It continues after the body dies. We call that epigenetics. There's actually things you can see about it. It's pretty amazing. If you look into the blood that was found by Ron Wyatt of our Mashiach, it was still living, which was unknown or unheard of for any blood that is old or like that. But it was still true. So something to look into there. And his blood still cries out for our reconciliation. <clears throat> 'Cause. And Yahuah reproved Cain because of Havel or Abel, and Cain slew Abel. And Yahuah reproved Cain because of Havel or Abel. And Yahuah reproved Cain because of Havel or Abel. And Yahuah reproved Cain because of Havel or Abel. And Yahuah reproved Cain because of Havel or Abel. And Yahuah reproved Cain because of Havel or Abel. because he had slain him, and he made him a fugitive on the earth because of the blood of his brother, and he cursed him upon the earth. And remember, he asked him first, even though he knew the minds of all men, he did not presume or judge or accuse. He asked him what happened. And after the man lied, he was rebuked. And on this account, it is written on the Shamaim tables, cursed is he who smites his neighbor treacherously. And let all who have seen and heard say, Amen. And the man who has seen and not declared it, let him be accursed as the other. This is where your lack of judging a man correctly will come back on you. If you if you don't judge according to this, the common law or proper right ruling, you yourself get the punishment that he should have. That is shown throughout, or that's shown by example in the Bible when you read, and we haven't gotten to it yet with our reading chronologically here, but we will. But if you want to skip ahead and see this in the course of events, go look at the kingdom or the reign of Saul or Shaul, the first king of Israel. They're the 12 tribes before David was put in place in his stead. He was told to do a thing to put a people under the ban, and he chose not to do the right judgment according to what was given. And the thing that he was supposed to do was done to him. He was accursed because he had seen and not done what he was told that he ought to. Just like we are told to do this thing, and when we don't, it happens to us. So, ob willing, you'll start to see these patterns. And this is why I keep telling you, in our country that's in covenant with the Almighty, every man being king collectively, if you will, the people are sovereign. It's like the children of Israel during the time of Judges, where they had no king but Yahuah, and we had to rightly rule according to his word. When we rebelled against doing things according to his word, our enemies have rule over us, same now as then. But more importantly, when you sit in judgment over a man over any matter, and you don't judge him according to the rules that he's given us to do so by, you yourself will suffer the fate that that man or that individual should have. And that's the truth. Everyone who's suffering unrighteously, I know it seems difficult, but they ought to be rejoicing if they're in the truth, because their reward's going to be great. He says, and for this reason we announce when we come before Yahuah our Elohim all the sin which is committed in Shamaim and on earth, and in light and in darkness and everywhere. And Adam and his wife mourned for Havel or Abel 4 weeks of years. So from 99 to 127 Anamundi, or years from the beginning of creation. And in the 4th year of the 5th week, or 130 Anamundi, sorry, they became joyful, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Set, or where we get the word Set. For he said, Yahuah has raised up a second seed unto us on the earth instead of Abel, for Cain slew him. This one says raised up. The other one's more accurate in the translation. It says he appointed, right? They put raised up here, but he set or appointed a second seed unto us. And that's what Seth or set means, to be set or placed, appointed. And in the 6th week, 134 to 140 Anamundi, he begat his daughter Azorah. Now, these ones you don't see in the other writings, but people wonder, where did they get their wives from? It was right here. And in the course of time, Adam and Hua have 12 children, one killing the other. It's a type of like our Mashiach, the 12 disciples, and there's parables in everything, just like I was mentioning. But you can see that if you take the time to think about it as we're going. Just point it out real quick. And Cain took Alwyn, his sister, to be his wife, and she bare him Hanok at the close of the fourth Yobel, 190 to 196 Anno Mundi. And in the first year of the first week of the fifth Yobel, 197 Anno Mundi, houses were built on the earth, and Cain built a city and called its name after the city or the name of his son Hanok or Iruk. And they believe that this is actually in Iraq or where Babylon is. That information, if I remember correctly, is in a book called Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy, which I found to be interesting. It's not directly the topic of the book, but it was in there in his section on the mark of Cain, which I don't necessarily agree with his interpretation of that mark of Cain bit, but historical evidence and what things are what anyone can check out, or at least what you used to be able to check out. Things are harder to fact check now if you just take what's on the internet plainly because things have been changed quite often. You can look at the Wayback Machine and see a lot of evidence of that, but sometimes even that's getting messed with today. If you all have been following along, we've encouraged everyone to check out the Antichrist for Dummies video series. And while they haven't made a new video in almost a year now, and they had advocated the the intervention for the fake pandemic that was going on, I don't know if they had any effect with that, but no one, I haven't heard from them or seen anything out for at least 8 months or longer. Point is, not everything in there is accurate, but you can fact check the things that they show about the signs in the sky and the events that have happened because of them over and over again throughout the book of Revelation. And you can see that the patterns fit over and over again. Believe what you can prove, but once you get through that, you get to the end of where they were studying. We're literally in the saucer judgments, the time of the bowl judgments of Revelation, where by 2035, 10 years from this year, the saucer judgment of darkness being poured out on the beast's throne and its kingdom will be culminated in the sky. If you take that darkness to be ignorance and deception and things that what scripture alludes to darkness being, you can see that all over the world being played out more heavily, more and more as time goes on. There's just lies after lies being put out all the time. So get the truth while you can, right? Study this stuff while you're able to, especially get a hold of older books that were less biased by things intentionally, right? Either way, we are on verse 10 here. Sorry about that. And it says, and Adam knew Hua, his wife, and she bare yet 9 sons. Then you had Set 10, Abel 11, and Cain 12, right? And in the 5th week of the 5th Yobel Jubilee, this is the years 225 through 231, Anno Mundi, Seth took Azorah his sister to be his wife, and in the 4th year of the 6th week, 2:35 a.m., she bare him Enosh, which we covered. It means like mortal or frail man. And it says, and he began to call the name of Yahuah on the earth. And in the 7th Yobel, in the 3rd week, 309 to 315 Anno Mundi, Enosh took Naom, his sister. This is like Noam, Noam to his sister to be his wife, and she bare him a son in the 3rd year of the 5th week, and he called his name Kenan. And at the close of the 8th Yobel, I don't know why it has 3 of them right there, but at the close of it, Kenan took Meluleleth, his sister to be his wife, and she bare him a son in the 9th Yobel, in the first week, in the 3rd year of this week, 395 a.m., and he called his name Mahalalel, which is the means of praising El, or the praiseworthy El, is how they translate that. And in the 2nd week of the 10th Yobel, 449 through 455 a.m., Mahalalel took unto him to wife Dinah, the daughter of Barachiel, the daughter of his father's brother. And she bare him a son in the 3rd week, in the 6th year, 461 a.m. And he called his name Yerad. They have the J there, but anyone can look into this. The J in German still says a Y sound. It's only in the English that that's taken the phonetic or the phonological sounds of a G with the character that was supposed to be with the Y and put them together. But that's Yerad, which is he will come down in the Hebrew, right? For in his days the Melachim of Yahuah descended on the earth, and those who are named the watchers, that they should instruct the children of men, and that they should do judgment and uprightness on the earth. This is the only reference that I have in any of the scriptural writings that I'm aware of outside of the apostolic times writings that mention this. But the watchers were not just put there, they were meant to instruct the children, and it was by their own instigation. In the homilies, the Clementine homilies, not the recognitions, but the homilies of Clement, Kepha's explanation or discussion of these times goes into a little more detail, where you find that the watchers asked, these are the watchers of the lowest Shamayim, and they had asked that they can be brought down to men to teach them righteousness because they were going wayward. And so they were given permission to do the thing they had asked, but they were also in becoming, or in going down there, they were also giving carnal desires. They felt hunger, they felt pleasure, they felt lust. And as our Mashiach experienced all these things and overcame it without sin, and as men have these frailties and they are able to be Kohanim over the people with compassion because they are likewise having the same suffrages. The watchers were given the same way, but they failed. And that's the problem of it. There was more than 200 of them that came down, but those were the 200 that went apostate, if you will, and they suffered the judgment that was given them. But anyways, this is the only place that it mentions that they were given to instruct the people. That explanation is gone over in more detail by Kepha in the homilies, but this is the only place that I found it written elsewhere as the second witness. If you happen to know of a place where it might be written otherwise, please do share. I don't remember if it's actually in Hanok at this point or not. It says, and in the 11th Yobel, 5:12 to 5:18 a.m., Yerad took to himself a wife, and her name was Barakah, the daughter of Rasuel, a daughter of his father's brother, in the 4th week of this Yobel, 5:22 a.m. And she bare him a son in the 5th week, in the 4th year of the Yobel, and he called his name Hanok. And he was first among men that are born on earth who learnt writing and knowledge and chokmah, and who wrote down the signs of Shamayim according to the order of their months in a book, that men might know the seasons of the years according to the order of their separate months. So this is key for everyone that wants to start checking out anything they want to see that's inspired writings. We should know as a fact And there are other witnesses that attest to this very thing, that Hanok was the first to be given Hokmah that wrote down things for our benefit. So anything that purports to be before his times is obviously not legitimate. It says, and he was the first to write a testimony, and he testified to the sons of men among the generations of the earth, and recounted the weeks of the Yobelim, and made known to them the days of the years, and set in order the months, and recounted the Sabbaths of the years, as we made them known to him. And I want you to keep in mind, he's the seventh from Adam, but born in 522. And I tend to take the book of Yobelim as the most accurate when it comes to dating. When you look at the Septuagint and Masoretic texts, both of them have issues with them. Not any two agree. The Samaritan Pentateuch, um, the books of Josephus, the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can look for what has multiple witnesses and kind of bear it out. But even I don't think any of them agree with Book of Yobelim exactly with how things are dated. When you look at how specific the dates are and things, how they line up, I tend to take this one as more legitimate because it puts everything in a context where it fits. And the children going into the land in the 50th Yobel, exactly 2,450 years from creation. Like everything is fitting, is just screams Palmoni, the wonderful number. Like he can do these things perfectly because he's the creator. But I'm not dogmatic about these things. We only have one witness that I'm aware of. So don't be overly dogmatic about the dates here, but I do want to point out some things that you might not notice otherwise. Both Hanok and Noach were alive before the death of Adam. That's something that people might not be aware of. When you consider the time differences between the book of Yobelim and the Masoretic text here in regard to the flood, there's about a 300-year difference. This one has it in 1300. The Masoretic text has it about 1600 AM. And then when you go and you follow along the genealogies back down to Jacob's time and the patriarchs, you get back to a congruent timeline between the two, so you get another 300-year difference the other way. How all that plays out, I don't know. There's too many discrepancies with the chronology there for me to figure out on my own, or for I don't know anyone that would be able to, unless we can get to the Dead Sea Scrolls and find out the accurate or the writings and the times given in there correctly, and they can help us out. But it says, sorry, let me continue here. One thing that is amazing about this is he was given all of how the calendar works, and we don't have that anymore. But it would have been given to all the ancients, and you can see that they all had the names of the stars and the meanings of those names in their own languages as it changed, which tells the good news account, or what they call the Gospel in the Stars. They have a few books on it. It's also the Mazzaroth by Francis Roslin. Amazing books that cover that. Francis Roslin's book is more in-depth and older, and I recommend everyone check that out because it shows that the book of Hanok was true. What he had, all the ancients were able to carry down with their civilizations to preserve in their own names and ways, for the most part, even on the modern times. So it says, and he was the first to write a testimony, and he testified to the sons of men among the generations of the earth, and he recounted the weeks of the Yobelim, and made known to them the days of the years, and set in order the months, and recounted the Sabbaths of the years, as we made them known to him. Sorry. And what was and what will be, he saw in a vision of his sleep, the animal apocalypse and the other ones that he has from the book of First Hanok, right? as it will happen to the children of men throughout their generations until the day of judgment. He saw and comprehended everything, and wrote his testimony, and placed the testimony on earth for all the children of men and for their generations. And in the 12th Yobelim, 582 to 588 AM, in the 7th week thereof, he took to himself a wife, and her name was Edna, the daughter of Danel. Dan-el, like Daniel, is my judge is El. That's also the word Donald, like the MacDonald clan was originally Daniel. He was the patriarch from the royalty of the Trojans that was the prince of the people. When they got to their promised land at Montrose or Mantrojan, by that time their language had been shifted enough that he was being called Donald or Donald, and then they became the MacDonalds or the sons of Donald, but it still means the same thing. El is judge, or in some capacity, the Don, the ruler appointed by El. But it says, the daughter of his father's brother, and in the 6th year, in this week, 587 AM, she bare him a son, and he called his name Methuselah, meaning the death of him sent, right? Or his death shall bring, as they say. And he was moreover with the messengers, speaking of Hanok, right? He was with the messengers of Yahuah these 6 Yobelim of years, and they showed him everything which is on earth and in the Shamayim, the rule of the sun, and he wrote down everything. And he testified to the watchers who had sinned with the daughters of men, for these had begun to unite themselves so as to be defiled with the daughters of men, and Hanok testified against them all. And he was taken from amongst the children of men, and we conducted him into the Garden of Eden in majesty and honor. And behold, there he writes down the condemnation and judgment of the world, and all the wickedness of the children of men. And on account of it, Yahuah brought the waters of the flood upon all the land of Eden. For there he was set as a sign, that he should testify against all the children of men, that he should recount all the deeds of the generations until the day of condemnation. And he burnt the incense of the set-apart place, sweet spices acceptable before Yahuah on the mount. And then this is important, where he always has, from the rising of the sun to the setting of the same, the name of Yahuah is praised, right? But he wants us to do that in the renewed covenant writings, in the sense of all the assemblies that were set up. But even back here, he had different areas in the world that were keeping his worship in a fashion. Perpetually, they do so in the Garden of Eden. He says, for Yahuah has 4 places on the earth, the Garden of Eden and the Mount of the East. I believe this to be in China. I can't prove that, though. And this mountain on which you are this day, Mount Sinai and Mount Zion, which will be set apart in the new creation for a sanctification of the earth. Through it will the earth be set apart from all guilt and its uncleanness throughout the generations of the world. And that's that renewed Yerushalayim that's going to come down, right? And in the 14th Yobelim, or Yobel rather, 6:52 AM, Methuselah took unto himself a wife, Edna, the daughter of Azrael, the daughter of his father's brother, in the 3rd week, in the 1st year of this week, 7:01 through 7:07 AM. And he begat a son, and called his name Lemech. And in the 15th Yobel, in the 3rd week, Lamech took to himself a wife, and her name was Betinos, Bet Enosh, the house of Enosh. So she was a daughter of the house of Enosh. The daughter of Barachiel, the daughter of his father's brother. And in this week she bare him a son, and he called his name Noach, saying, This one will comfort me for my trouble and all my work, and for the ground which Yahuah has cursed. And Noach means comfort and rest, if you recall. And at the close of the 19th Yobel, so just to point out there, he was born, all right, sorry, in the 700s there. That was still a few hundred years before Adam passed away. That was my point. He was alive during the first generation. He lived through seeing all the generations there and then lived through the flood. That's not the picture that we're normally familiar with. This is at the close of the 19th Yobel in the 7th week, in the 6th year, 9:30 a.m. thereof, Adam died. And all his sons buried him in the land of his creation, and he was the first to be buried in the earth. On the day that you eat thereof, you shall die. And he lacked 70 years of 1,000 years, for 1,000 years are as one day in the testimony of the Shamayim. And therefore was it written concerning the tree of knowledge, On the day that you eat thereof, you shall die. For this reason he did not complete the years of this day, for he died during it. And that's true for everyone who eats, who willingly does that thing, right? As they hear and they're now culpable for the truth given to them. I mention these things because it's so easy for us to overlook the obvious, but I want us to be careful. If you've now read that you ought not to do a thing, you should repent quickly of it and then never do it again. And then he chalks it up to ignorance, and it is not held against you. But if you continue in the thing, then there requires some correction for it. For as long as you continue to do it, for the measure you give, it's going to be turned to you because he's the truth. It's not vindictive, it's reality. He said it, it's the way things work. As soon as we get that, we can start being clever to do good. That's the whole point, so that we're not suffering our poor choices. And I mention that as somebody who suffered my poor choices quite often, but I finally, by his favor, was given to comprehend it, right? Now I try to talk to my children all the time, and anyone that'll listen, about just avoid that to begin with, and you won't have to suffer. You can have benefit for your choices. It says at the close of this Yobel, Cain was killed after him in the same year. For his house fell upon him, and he died in the midst of his house, and he was killed by its stones. For with a stone he had killed Havel, or Abel, and by a stone was he killed in righteous judgment. For this reason it was ordained on the Shamayim tablets, with the instrument with which a man kills his neighbor, with the same shall he be killed. And after the manner he wounded him, in like manner shall they deal with him. Now, I don't know if this specific injunction is put like that anywhere in the Torah anymore, but we see the application of it in a few places. There's a gentleman who used to cut off the thumbs of kings and have them sit under his table to feed them, and then that very thing was done to him by the children as his instruments of judgment in the books of Judges, I believe. You find other things where that it seems like weird things that they do, but it's because that's what that gentleman did to others, so it was suffered for him to have it happen to him. Samuel as well, the man that Shaul did not kill, Shaul did. He says, and he claimed uh, because you have bereaved mothers of their children, now your mother will be bereaved of hers. Blah, blah. In the same way that he did, it was done to him. But we'll go ahead and continue. It says, and in the 25th, 12:05 a.m., Yobel, Noach took to himself a wife, and her name was Emzara, the daughter of Rachael, the daughter of his father's brother. In the first year, in the 5th week, 12:07 a.m., and in the 3rd year thereof she bare him Shem. In the 5th year thereof, 12:09 a.m., she bare him Ham. And in the 1st year, in the 6th week, 12:12 a.m., she bare him Japheth. And if you back up 500 years, that's about the 700s when he was born, which fits with him being 500 before having his children. Just for continuity's sake, you can see how that lines up. All right. Oh, excuse me. We have time to continue here. This is Yobelim chapter 5. And this is when men began to multiply and lawlessness or Torahlessness increased. It says, and it came to pass when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the Malachim or messengers of Yahuah saw them on a certain year of this Yobel, that they were beautiful to look upon, and they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons, and they were giants or Gibborim. The book of Hanok says Elim, right, is the first stage. We do call them the Titans, and they were the ones that were literally said to be miles high, mountains tall. It mentions in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hanok mentions that it was 2,000 ells, which equates to over 1.2 miles tall for some of these things. I mean, beyond our ability to really grasp in our mind. But there is, for anyone that really wants to see evidence of this, you can look at Mud Fossil Universities on YouTube. And while I don't I don't recommend that you believe everything that the gentleman purports, because he says that he can find giants in space, and he shows all these pictures that NASA puts out, but they're taking pictures of the ground and lying to people. However, he looks at the ground and he shows how things in the composition of minerals came from blood and other elements from bodies that were decomposing. And he goes through the science behind how mud fossils come to be and how things become fossilized in a variety of methods. Absolutely amazing work in this field. I mean, he's really been helping to change how the academics are viewing things because of the information's too powerful to be ignored. But some of the plain evidence that they have, which I recommend, is that he can show you a digit for a finger. It's supposed to be the first knuckle of a pointer finger that's 3 feet. It's a 3 foot wide boulder. So it's massive. And you can see the fingernail bed and everything. There's other stuff like that that show that this is literally true. There was such enormously sized people. He had DNA evidence to prove it. So you don't have to take people's words, but his word is true, and you can find the evidence to corroborate it. That's what I would recommend everyone look to do. This is, and Torahlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, alike men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walks on the earth. All of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other. And Torahlessness increased on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of all men, thus evil continually. It doesn't go into too much detail, but you find out in the Book of the Giants from the Dead Sea Scrolls and in the first Hanok, more about this, which I don't really want to get into, but the first reference, remember, there's always a physical and then there's a spiritual. So the first reference of physical horse uh, with adultery and things of that nature is mentioned with these individuals. The spiritual nature comes later, but that's something to keep in mind that probably no one's really put together before in relation to what the horse represents. However, in practical, just to be honest, the Watchers made these titans that could not be sustained by what was on the earth. So they had the bright idea to make monsters to mate with animals to have a food source that was more readily available. And then there was chaos and fighting and death and destruction, all these things with these massive beings vying against each other. And that's what was going on in this Torahless world that was corrupting all flesh. In particular, the seeds of Cain was susceptible to them, and then those of the righteous seed, the remnant that were stumbling with things going on, either through persecution or from going and following along with those that were doing evil. A type of what would happen later on, if you can see that. And Yahuah looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, and all flesh had corrupted its orders, and all that were upon the earth had wrought all manner of evil before his eyes. And he said that he would destroy man and all flesh upon the face of the earth, which he had created. But Noah found free merited favor, or free unmerited favor, before the eyes of Yahuah. And against the messengers whom he had sent upon the earth, he was exceedingly wroth, and he gave commandment to root them out of all their dominion. And he bade us to bind them in the depths of the earth. And behold, they are bound in the midst of them and kept separate. And that's the thing. People have different ideas about these watchers being released and doing all these things today, but that's garbage. This, the book of Hanok, the epistle from Kepha, and Yahudah all say that they're in darkness, imprisoned until the great day of judgment at this time and until then. So we want to keep to what his word says and not just believe people's opinions. It says, and against their sons went forth a command from before his face that they should be smitten with the sword and be removed under the Shamayim. And he said, my Ruach shall not always abide on man, for they also are flesh, and their days shall be 120 years. And we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls that that was said in the 480th year of the life of Noah, and then in the 600th year was when the flood commenced. And he sent his sword into their midst that each should slay his neighbor, and they began to slay each other till they all fell by the sword and were destroyed from the earth. And their fathers were witnesses, and after this they were bound in the depths of the earth forever, until the day of the great condemnation, when judgment is executed on those, or on all those who have corrupted their ways and their works before Yahuah. And he destroyed from, or sorry, and he destroyed all from their places, and there was not left one of them whom he judged not according to all their wickedness, everyone according to their way. And he made for all his works a new and righteous nature, so that they should not sin in their whole nature forever, but should be all righteous, each in his kind always. And the judgment of all is ordained and written on the Shamayim tablets in righteousness, even all who depart from the path which is ordained for them to walk in. And if they walk not therein, judgment is written down for every creature and for every kind. And that's why I was trying to tell you, like the dietary laws, turtles, I don't know if they violate any of the Torah given to them. I'm sure they eat the green thing of the earth and they live for hundreds of years, unaccosted. But other animals that don't follow the injunction, their lifespans are shortened, they have diseases and problems, they're plagued by demons. There's a picture here for us, right? And there is nothing in Shamayim or on earth and in light or in darkness or in the grave or in the depth or in the place of darkness, which is not judged. And all their judgments are ordained and written and engraved. And, or sorry, in regard to all, he will judge the great according to his greatness, and the small according to his smallness, and each according to his ways. And he is not one who will regard the person, nor is he one who will receive gifts. If he says that he will execute judgment on each, if one gave everything that is on the earth, he will not regard the gifts of the person, nor accept anything at his hands, for he is a righteous judge. And of the children of Yisrael, it has been written and ordained, if they turn to him in righteousness, he will forgive all their transgressions and pardon all their sins. It is written and ordained that he will show mercy. The earth is filled with the mercy or loving kindness of Yahuah. Right? Day by day, he renews his mercies or loving kindnesses, right? His chesedim, if you will. But he will show mercy to all who turn from all their guilt once each year. Talking about the Day of Atonement there. And this is also repeated you have in the Leviticus chapter 19 or 23, where you have the Day of Atonement, the instructions for it, and elsewhere, I believe it's in Numbers, it mentions it in Deuteronomy. And then you have in the book of Gad this year, chapter 14, what happens with the book of life and the other two books on the first day of the seventh month, leading up to the Day of Atonement every year. So it's for those who actually keep it that this is applicable. But if not, and you're an unintentional sinner, then after the Day of Atonement, if you have not repented according to the means he's given you, you're given over to Satan for him to do what he will, and he takes you into the wilderness to destroy you, it says. This is how reality works. I'm not saying this to, hopefully it scares people if they need it, but it's not my intention. My intention is like a smelling salt under the nose there so we can go, what's going on? We need to pay attention. And that's true for every one of us, right? And it says, as for all those who corrupted their ways and their thoughts before the flood, no man's person was accepted except or save that of Noah alone. For his person was accepted in behalf of his sons, whom Yahuah delivered from the waters of the flood on his account. For his heart was righteous in all his ways, according as it was commanded regarding him, and he had not departed from aught that was ordained for him. So he did what was commanded, and he was delivered because Yahuah showed him favor or mercy. That theme is something that is true for us as well. Favor is not a license to sin, it's a permission, a license to come back to him even though we're sinners, if you will. Because otherwise it would be unlawful. As violators of the covenant, we are cut off, right? But people have been deceived into having that backwards. And it's easy to see right from the Bible that what I'm saying is true. I I beg anyone prove me wrong. Try to. I'm sure you'll be surprised. It says, and Yahuwah said that he would destroy everything which was upon the earth, both man and cattle, and beasts and fowls of the air, and that which moves on the earth. And he commanded Noah to make him an ark, that he might deliver himself from the waters of the flood. And Noah made the ark in all respects as he commanded him, in the 27th Yobel of years, in the 5th week, in the 5th year, on the Chodesh of the 1st month, or 1307 Anamundi. And he entered into he entered in the 6th thereof, 1308 AM, in the 2nd month, on the new month of the 2nd month, till the 16th. So from the 1st until the 16th. And he entered, and all that we brought to him into the ark. And Yahuah closed it from without on the 17th evening. And Yahuah opened the 7 floodgates of Shamayim, the windows of the heavens, if you will, or it's the openings in the firmament that he's talking about that allowed the waters above it to be poured out into or within the firmament below onto the earth. And it says, and the mouths of the fountains of the great deep, 7-mouthed in number, and the floodgates began to pour down water from the Shamayim 40 days and 40 nights. And the fountains of the deep also sent up waters until the whole world was full of water. When the waters increased upon the earth, 15 cubits did the waters rise above the high mountains, and the ark was lift up above the earth, and it moved upon the face of the waters. And the water prevailed on the face of the earth 5 months, 150 days. And the ark went and rested on the top of Lubar, one of the mountains of Ararat. We say Ararat, but the Hebrew would be Ararat. The land in secular history is known as Urartu, and that's Armenia over between the Black and Caspian Sea there. It's where Assyria was fighting, and the kingdom of Urartu was eventually conquered by Hebrews that took it over and then left. They were known as Sumerians at the time, but that's for a later period. However, that is in current Turkey along the Iranian border there. This is, and on the new month in the 4th month, the fountains of the great deep were closed, and the floodgates of the Shamayim were restrained. And on the Chodesh, or new month of the 7th month, all the mouths of the abysses of the earth were opened, and the water began to descend into the deep below. And on the new month of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains were seen. And on the new month of the 1st month, the earth became visible. So you can see there's a timeline here, 3-month periods, and then on the Chodesh, a significant event in regards to the flood year. And because of this, this is what Noah observed, what he lived through, the appointed changes or causes of things by the Almighty that he chose to commemorate as memorial days that are perpetual even to our times. There's only 4 of them, but this is the beginning. This is one of the things where a man instituted a festival that was ordained before it, but enumerated in creation and time that we are supposed to keep. It's not the first time it happens, but it is consistently done throughout Scripture and even after the time where the Torah and the feast days are given. People make exception to it, and they want to say that you ought not to do things, which I don't argue. If people don't want to keep Purim or don't want to keep the Hanukkah, I'm not going to tell them to. If they read what the accounts say and they realize it's commemorating the deliverances of the Almighty, and you're supposed to feast and help and enjoy that day, rejoice in His works and word and His deliverances and His wonders, and help those in need. If you can find fault with that, I would like to know. But I'm not talking about what people have turned things into. I'm talking about what the words say we ought to do. If you find fault with that, please share. But right here, it says, And the waters disappeared from above the earth in the 5th week, in the 7th year, 1309 AM, thereof. And on the 17th day, in the 2nd month, the earth was dry. So exactly 364 days from the very beginning, it was done. And that was a day for a year, literal. The other is a spiritual application that comes later. If you can see, there's always a first. The first is physical, the next is not. And that's, Father willing, the pattern that you can continue to see as we go along. And on the 27th thereof he opened the ark and sent forth from it beasts and cattle and birds and every moving thing. This gives clarity where you have discrepancies elsewhere because it mentions, it doesn't quite have the timelines right. Even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's a little bit messed up in the account rendering. But it was dry on the very same day it started to rain on the 17th. However, they stayed for 10 more days in the ark before letting the animals and themselves out. All right. So just one moment. All right. I would like to continue here and read about because these breaks are arbitrary, really. And this theme is continued. The establishment of those festivals is kept immediately, and why. But we'll save that for next week. Anyone that wants to can hop on ahead. However, Father willing, we've given you enough to consider and to contemplate to last a week, if not longer. If you have any comments, questions, or anything you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to. And if you find anything in agreement with the things we've mentioned that we didn't mention ourselves, I'd appreciate it. If you find anything that disagrees, don't hesitate to share because we're all learning. It could be that it's true, or it could be that it's not. And I'll give you an example just real quick. In the book of Jasher that we have available, I believe there might even be two versions of it, just like you have three books of Hanok or Enoch, right? They have one or two versions of the book of Jasher, but neither one of them I personally consider legitimate in any capacity. The one that I've had looked through and I've perused some of it is constantly and continually in minor and major things in disagreement with both the open writings of the Bible and the apocryphal writings that are not so available, or the hidden writings that are not open. So in there, it mentions the death of Cain, or the death of Abel by Cain being used with a metal implement, while in the book of Yobelim here, it clearly says that it was with a rock and explains that with a rock he died and goes over the reasoning there. There's tons of inconsistencies in that book compared to this one. So that kind of phenomenon is what you have to be careful of. There's others that might be in agreement or disagreement. So to learn them helps us whittle it out. I don't claim to have everything down perfectly, but Father willing, we can all grow as we learn together. So anyways, thank you for your time. We'll be able to continue with our reading next week. And until then, you all have a wonderful Shabbat and a great week ahead, Shavua Tov, and we'll see you then. Shalom.